What is going on, everyone? Do you hate politics? Do you avoid people that live and breathe politics? If you said yes, you should move to one of the states on this list. As we learned in our What's Destroying America video, most people think that politics is killing this country, more specifically, the political zealots. These are the people that can't quit talking about politics. If you don't vote the way they vote, you're obviously insane or you hate the country. Look at any video on YouTube about almost anything, and you'll see someone in the comment section is blaming a political party for something. What you'll also notice is that they all have a word or a phrase that they use every single month over and over. What happens is they'll see some political person that they admire or they follow, and they'll use a phrase or word, and then these people get on the internet and they just use the same word or phrase ad nauseam. Some of my favorites were "your bias is showing." That was a big one for a while. Hubris was another one. Then we got fake news, and of course the deep state. These are words and phrases they all have to inject into every comment section. If all that nonsense is something you really want to avoid, then these states are the best states for you because these states have the fewest politically engaged residents. They have the lowest voter turnouts, hardly anyone shows up to town halls with their elected officials, and they all have the highest percentages of residents that say they don't follow politics. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Hawaii. Why would you follow politics in Hawaii? I mean, there's so much fun stuff to do. That'd be the last thing on my radar is politics. But in Hawaii, they really don't follow politics, and a lot of it has to do with most Hawaiians don't care about politics because they really wish they weren't in the United States. The ones that are happy that they're in the United States are the ones that retired from the mainland there. Talk to almost any Hawaiian. They'll have some gripes about being part of the United States. In the 2020 election cycle, only 68.6% of eligible voters actually voted. If you look at both ends of the age spectrum, you have 21% of the 18 to 24-year-olds voted and 60% of the 64-year-olds and older. To give you an idea how low that is, Virginia is the state with the highest turnout in some cases. 60% of their 18 to 24-year-olds showed up, and the 64 and above was 73%. Number 9, New Mexico. There's a few states in this country where the residents really need to start paying attention to politics. New Mexico is one of them. That state needs to make some changes. They have for a long time. They have one of the highest poverty rates. They have one of the highest rates of residents on public assistance. And a lot of that state has some serious crime issues. 68.2% of eligible voters actually voted in the 2020 election. 40% of the 18 to 24-year-olds voted, and 74% of the 64 years old and older. New Mexico is another state where most of the residents don't trust the government. Number 8, Alabama. The Yellowhammer State is a southern state, and one thing they all have in common, they hate the government. A lot of us kind of judge people and rank people by what they do for a living. In Alabama, they see their bottom 3 as sleazy used car salesman, drug trafficker, politician. And it shows. Only 68% of eligible voters actually voted in the 2020 election, 42% of the 18 to 24-year-olds, and only 66% of the 64 and up crowd voted. Number 7, Utah. Utah's a strange state because when it comes to the federal elections, they really don't get involved, but these people are very involved in state and local governments. They show up for town halls for those people, and things like that. When it comes to their senators, their congressmen, and who's running for president, I don't think they really care too much. And it sort of shows also. 67.4% of eligible voters voted in 2020. 43% of the 18 to 24-year-olds voted, and 75.2% of the 64 years old and older crowd. Number 6, South Dakota. South Dakotans just don't show up to vote. That's all there is to it. And I think a lot of it has to do with their environment. I mean, it's really cold around November when you're supposed to vote, and South Dakota gets really cold. And on top of it, they got a lot of rural areas. It's hard to get to the polls if you have to. Now, they can request a mail-in ballot in South Dakota. It's a no excuse one, meaning you don't have to have a reason. You could just request one and get one. And they don't really do that too much. 67.3% of eligible voters in South Dakota voted in the 2020 election. Only 25% of the 18 to 24-year-old eligible voters voted in the 2020 election. That's the lowest on this list. 74% of the 64 years old and older crowd did vote. Number 5, West Virginia. West Virginia politics have, they've got a long history of dysfunction. One thing I do like about West Virginia politics is their governor, Jim Justice. This man's incredible. First of all, at the beginning of the COVID, he was doing a press conference and he dropped an F-bomb on statewide television. Of course, that made it go national television. Everyone had that one. He tried to blame it on a glitch in the software that runs the microphone or something. But then just like last month or whatever, he held up his dog's butt. Yes, at the state capitol in front of cameras, he held his dog up upside down towards the camera. It's a bulldog named Baby Dog, and he showed it and then invited Bette Midler out to West Virginia to give it a kiss. I'm not even joking. Only 67.3% of eligible voters in West Virginia voted in the 2020 election. 32% of the 18 to 24-year-olds voted, and the 64 and older crowd, only 63% of them voted. Number 4, Oklahoma. Oklahoma always seems to show up right next to New Mexico when it comes to poverty and number of residents on public assistance. They're always right next to each other. Crime, Oklahoma's doing much better, but most things when it comes to poverty and people going hungry, it's kind of big in Oklahoma. Oklahoma, like South Dakota, has a lot of the same landscape. They've got a lot of rural areas. People don't get in to vote. Whatever the case may be, they're not as cold as South Dakota. And they're also a state that has the no excuse absentee voting, meaning they just got to ask. No excuse needed. They still don't get to the polls too often, and they should. 67.2% of eligible voters in Oklahoma voted in the 2020 election, 33% of the 18 to 24-year-old crowd, and 70% of the 64 years old and older crowd voted. Number 3, Florida. Florida. I thought for sure election day would be like fever pitch for these people, 90% turnout, people standing in line for hours to vote, holding signs, wearing hats, t-shirts, all that stuff. Election day in Florida, I really thought it would be like a Super Bowl of politics for these people. But no, about 33% of the registered voters there don't even bother showing up to vote. 67% of eligible Florida voters showed up to vote in the 2020 election. Only 37% of the 18 to 24-year-olds did, and 69% of the 64 and older crowd showed up at the polls. And Florida is another state where they have no excuse absentee voting. You just got to ask. Number 2, Nevada. This one kind of makes sense to me. I think people in Nevada worry about other things than what's going on in politics. They never just seem to be in the front of any political story or anything like that. Anyone that follows politics can probably name a few other senators and congressmen. You could, name a lot of them, I'm sure, but I think the average Joe that's not living in Nevada couldn't tell you who's running that state. I don't. I have no idea. And I kind of consume political stuff. I just went to see who their 2 senators are. I've never even heard of these 2 women. Looked at their congressman, never heard of any of these people either. Their governor, never even heard of that dude either. I grew up in Southern California, so I'm the next state over growing up, and now I live in Oregon, one of the states that share their northern border. Still never heard of their people. Only 66.2% of eligible voters in Nevada voted at the 2020 election, 42% of the 18 to 24-year-olds, and 73% of the 64 and older crowd voted. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. There's a link down below. And if you want to help out this channel, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up. And if you got time, maybe the suggested videos at the end of the video, maybe you can watch one of those for us. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Arkansas. Wow, who saw this one coming? Arkansas is a lot like Nevada. I don't think a lot of people know what's going on there politically since Bill Clinton left. And their people really don't care. Arkansas leads the country in mistrust towards the government. They're number 1 in that, and they're number 1 of people not showing up to vote. I think those 2 have something to do with each other. I could be wrong. While I was researching this video, I got way down that rabbit hole of learning about different things in politics and their voting trends. This one man who had worked on campaigns over the years said that back in the late 80s, there was an election where they had a county in Arkansas that had like 1,100 people in the whole county. Only like 200 people showed up to vote. That is what you call a horrible turnout. But in the 2020 election, only 62% of the eligible voters in Arkansas actually showed up to vote. Now, throughout this list, we started off with Hawaii at 68.6% showing up, right? And then we went all the way down to number 2, Nevada, with 66.2%. So in 9 entries, we only moved the needle 2 percentage points. Now you drop 4 almost for this one. 62% of eligible voters in Arkansas. That's insane. 34% of the 18 to 24-year-old crowd showed up, and 67.30 of the 64 years and up crowd showed up to vote. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a nice day. Remember, we're all in this together, and be nice to each other.